Sarah Thompson stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully applying the last touches of her makeup. Her dark skin glowed under the warm bathroom lights as she got ready for what was supposed to be a special evening. It was her 5th wedding anniversary with James, and she had made reservations at Le Maison, the fanciest French restaurant in town. At 32 years old, Sarah had everything she had dreamed of since law school. She was now a senior corporate lawyer at Anderson and Partners, one of the city's top law firms. Just last month, she had earned a big promotion that came with a corner office overlooking the city skyline. Everything in her life seemed perfect from the outside, everything except her marriage. Sarah sighed as she heard James moving around in their bedroom. He had been in a bad mood all week, ever since she mentioned her new promotion at dinner. 5 years ago, when they first got married, James had been different. He was a successful marketing manager then, always bringing home exciting stories about his campaigns and taking her on surprise weekend trips. But 2 years ago, his company went through massive layoffs, and James lost his job. "Are you almost done in there?" James's irritated voice came through the door. "We're going to be late." "Just a minute," Sarah called back, checking her reflection one last time. Her dark curls fell perfectly around her shoulders, and the new red dress she had bought for the occasion fit her like a glove. She wanted everything to be perfect tonight. Maybe, just maybe, a nice dinner would help bring back some of their old spark. When she opened the bathroom door, she found James already dressed in his navy blue suit, the one she had bought him last Christmas. He was standing by the window, scrolling through his phone with a frown on his face. At 35, James was still handsome, with his brown hair neatly combed and his tall frame carrying the suit well. But there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there in the early days of their marriage. "You look handsome," Sarah said, trying to brighten the mood. James barely looked up from his phone. "Thanks," he mumbled. "We should get going." "Is this place expensive? I haven't seen my unemployment check come in yet." Sarah felt her heart sink a little. This was how most of their conversations went these days, always coming back to money. "Don't worry about it," she said softly. "It's our anniversary. Let's just enjoy the evening." The drive to Le Maison was quiet. Sarah watched the city lights pass by outside her window, remembering how different things had been 5 years ago. On their wedding day, James had promised to love and cherish her forever. Their friends and family had been so happy for them, a successful interracial couple who seemed to have it all figured out. But now, sitting in the car with the silence growing heavier between them, Sarah couldn't help but wonder where things had gone wrong. Was it just the job loss that had changed James? Or was it something deeper? The way he had been acting lately, especially since she got her promotion, made her wonder if he had issues with her success. As they pulled into the restaurant's parking lot, Sarah noticed James's hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The valet approached their car with a friendly smile, but James barely acknowledged him as he handed over the keys. "Ready?" Sarah asked, putting on her best smile. She had spent weeks planning this evening, making sure everything would be perfect. The restaurant had promised their best table, and she had even called ahead to arrange for a special anniversary cake to be served at the end of their meal. James nodded stiffly, adjusting his tie. "Let's get this over with," he muttered under his breath, but Sarah heard him anyway. She pretended not to notice, holding on to hope that the elegant atmosphere and good food might help smooth things over. As they walked into Le Maison, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this evening was going to be different from what she had planned. But she had no idea just how different it would turn out to be. The hostess at Le Maison led Sarah and James to their table, a quiet corner spot with flickering candlelight and a view of the restaurant's elegant garden. Sarah noticed how other diners turned to look at them as they passed. They made a striking couple, her in her red dress and James in his perfectly tailored suit. But these days, she wondered if people were also noticing the tension between them. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said, placing their menus on the table. James immediately picked his up, holding it like a shield between them. Sarah tried not to sigh as she opened her own menu. "The seafood looks good," she said, trying to start a conversation. "Remember that amazing lobster we had on our honeymoon?" James lowered his menu slightly, and for a moment, Sarah saw a flicker of softness in his eyes. "That was a nice trip," he said, but then his expression hardened again. "Back when I could afford to take you to nice places." Before Sarah could respond, their waiter appeared. He was a young man with a friendly smile who introduced himself as Marcus. "Can I start you off with some wine? Perhaps our house champagne? I see from our notes that you're celebrating an anniversary tonight. Yes, we'll have the champagne, Sarah said quickly, hoping the alcohol might help James relax. But she saw him tense up at her quick decision. You don't need to order for both of us, James said sharply after Marcus left. I'm not one of your junior associates at the firm. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she kept her voice calm. I just thought it would be nice to celebrate, James. It is our anniversary. Celebrate what? James scoffed, looking around the fancy restaurant. How you're the big successful lawyer while I sit at home sending out resumes that nobody responds to. Several diners at nearby tables glanced their way. Sarah leaned forward, speaking softly. That's not fair. You know I've been supporting you through this rough patch because I love you. We're a team, remember? A team? James laughed bitterly. Is that what you tell your work friends? That your unemployed husband is your teammate? Marcus returned with the champagne, expertly popping the cork and pouring 2 glasses. If he noticed the tension at the table, he didn't show it. Are you ready to order? Sarah ordered the salmon, while James chose the most expensive steak on the menu, looking at Sarah with a challenging expression as he did so. She pretended not to notice, taking a sip of her champagne instead. As they waited for their food, Sarah tried again to salvage the evening. She talked about the funny things her colleague's daughter had said at the office party last week, about the new coffee shop that had opened near their house, about anything except work or money. James barely responded, drinking his champagne quickly and checking his phone under the table. Their food arrived, perfectly plated and smelling delicious. Sarah noticed that despite his earlier attitude, James seemed to enjoy his steak. For a brief moment, as they ate in silence, she could almost pretend things were normal between them. I got an email today, James said suddenly, putting down his fork. Remember that marketing position I interviewed for last month? Sarah's heart lifted. Did you get it? No, James said flatly. They went with someone who had more recent experience. Can you believe that? 10 years in the industry, and I'm getting passed over because I've been unemployed for a while. He stabbed at his steak aggressively. Meanwhile, you're getting promoted again. James, please, Sarah whispered, noticing more people looking their way. This isn't the place. Then where is the place, Sarah? James's voice rose slightly. At home, where I have to sit all day while you're out being successful. Or maybe at one of your office parties where everyone looks at me with pity. The anniversary cake they had ordered was approaching their table, carried by Marcus with a small candle flickering on top. Sarah saw it coming and felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of dread. Something in James's eyes, in the way his hands were clenched on the table, told her this evening was about to get much worse. Marcus approached their table with the anniversary cake, unaware of the tension that had been building all evening. The small chocolate cake was beautifully decorated with white frosting roses and gold leaf, with Happy Anniversary written in elegant script. A single candle flickered in the center, casting dancing shadows across the white tablecloth. Happy Anniversary, Marcus said cheerfully, placing the cake between them. Several other diners turned to look, some smiling at what they thought was a romantic moment. Would you like me to take a photo? Before Sarah could respond, James spoke up. A photo? Sure, why not? Another perfect moment for Sarah to show off on social media. Look at me treating my unemployed husband to dinner. Marcus's smile faltered. He placed the cake server on the table and quietly stepped back, sensing that something wasn't right. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm as more people turned to stare at their table. That's enough, James, she said quietly but firmly. We can discuss this at home. Oh, now you want to discuss things? James's voice grew louder. Like how you discussed taking this promotion with me, or how you discussed buying this expensive dinner that I can't pay for. Sarah reached for her purse. If the bill is bothering you this much, we can split it. I know you received that inheritance money from your aunt last week. Split it? James's face turned red. Split it? So now you want to humiliate me even more? An older couple at the next table was openly watching now. The woman had her hand over her mouth, and the man was half rising from his chair as if unsure whether to intervene. James, please lower your voice. Sarah tried again, her lawyer's training helping her maintain her composure. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene. James laughed bitterly. Oh, I'll show you a scene. Everything that happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sarah saw James's hand move toward the cake. She saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of hurt, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. She saw the candlelight reflect off his wedding ring as his hand gripped the edge of the cake plate. "James, don't," she started to say, but it was too late. In one swift motion, James picked up the anniversary cake and threw it directly at Sarah's face. The cold shock of frosting hit her skin as chocolate cake crumbled down her red dress. The candle extinguished mid-air, sending a thin trail of smoke curling up between them. The entire restaurant fell silent. Someone gasped. A glass shattered somewhere as a waiter dropped their tray in surprise. Sarah sat perfectly still, feeling cake and frosting slide down her face and onto her new dress. She could smell the chocolate, could feel the dampness seeping through the expensive fabric, could sense every eye in the restaurant fixed on her. James stood there, breathing heavily, his hand still raised from throwing the cake. For a moment, he looked shocked by his own actions. Then his face twisted into something between regret and defiance. "Sarah, he started to say, but stopped when he saw her expression. Sarah hadn't moved. She hadn't screamed or cried or thrown anything back. Instead, she slowly reached for her napkin and began. With cake still dripping down her face, Sarah unlocked her phone and opened the camera app. Her movements were careful and controlled, like she was in the middle of an important court presentation, rather than sitting in a restaurant covered in chocolate cake. The silence in the room was so complete that everyone could hear the soft click as she pressed the record button. "My name is Sarah Thompson," she said clearly into the camera, her voice steady and professional. "Today is October 15th, 2024, approximately 8:45 p.m. at Le Maison restaurant. I am recording this video to document that my husband, James Thompson, just threw our anniversary cake at me in front of the entire restaurant." She turned the camera to show her cake-covered dress, then panned it around the silent restaurant, capturing the shocked faces of other diners. James stood frozen, his anger replaced by growing realization of what he had done. "Sarah, stop recording," he said, reaching for her phone. "You're embarrassing both of us." Sarah moved the phone away from his reach. "No, James. You embarrassed us when you decided to throw cake at your wife in public. I'm just documenting what happened." She looked directly at him through the cake-smeared strands of her hair. "For once, you don't get to control the narrative." An older woman at a nearby table stood up and walked over, offering Sarah her napkin. "Honey, are you okay? Do you need help?" "Thank you," Sarah said, still recording. "I appreciate your kindness." She turned back to the camera. "As you can see, complete strangers are showing more respect for me right now than my own husband." Marcus, who had finally unfrozen, hurried over with a stack of clean napkins. "Ma'am, would you like me to call someone for you? The police, perhaps?" Before Sarah could answer, she heard a familiar voice from the restaurant entrance. Oh my God, Sarah. It was her younger sister, Tanya, rushing toward their table. Sarah had texted her earlier about dropping off some work documents after dinner, but now the timing couldn't have been better. "What did you do to my sister?" Tanya demanded, glaring at James as she reached their table. She was still in her nurse's scrubs, having come straight from her hospital shift. "I'm fine, Tanya," Sarah said calmly, still recording. "But I would appreciate it if you could drive me home. I have a spare dress in my office that I can change into." "Like hell you're going back to that house with him," Tanya said, putting a protective arm around her sister's shoulders, not caring that cake was getting on her scrubs. James finally seemed to find his voice again. "Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. Just stop recording and we can talk about this." Sarah looked at him through the phone's camera. "We're done talking, James. You've said everything I needed to hear, not just with words, but with actions." She stopped the recording and saved it. The restaurant manager appeared, a concerned look on his face. "Mrs. Thompson, please accept our deepest apologies for your experience. Your meal is, of course, complimentary." "No," Sarah interrupted, reaching into her purse. She pulled out her credit card and handed it to Marcus. "I will pay for everything, including the cake and any cleanup needed." She turned to face the other diners. "I apologize to everyone for having their evening disrupted." Several people shook their heads, murmuring words of support. One man called out, "You have nothing to apologize for, ma'am." Tanya had returned from her car with a towel and was gently wiping Kate from her sister's face. "I got your overnight bag in my car from when we went to the gym yesterday. Let's get you cleaned up." James stood helplessly watching as Sarah gathered her things. "What are you going to do with that video?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time that evening she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it held something powerful: determination. Tanya drove Sarah to her law office in silence, occasionally glancing at her sister with worried eyes. Sarah sat straight in the passenger seat, still covered in cake, staring ahead with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural given what had just happened. "The video is already uploaded to my private cloud storage," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. "And I've sent copies to my work email and yours." "Good," Tanya replied, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Are you going to press charges? Because you should. What he did was assault, Sarah." Sarah shook her head slightly. "No, that's not my plan. At least not yet." She looked down at her ruined dress, now stiff with dry chocolate cake. "I'm going to do something else." They reached the towering glass building where Sarah worked. At this hour, the lobby was empty except for the night security guard, Mr. Peterson, who did a double take when he saw Sarah's condition. "Miss Thompson, are you all right?" he asked, immediately standing up from his desk. "I'm fine, Mr. Peterson," Sarah said with a small smile. "Just a difficult dinner. Could you let us up to my office, please?" In her corner office on the 32nd floor, Sarah finally allowed herself to really look at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her elegant hairstyle was ruined, cake and frosting had dried in patches on her skin, and her red dress was completely destroyed. But her eyes were clear and focused. "Here," Tanya said, pulling out fresh clothes from Sarah's gym bag. "Go clean up. I'll call Mom." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Don't call Mom yet. I need to do something first." She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. "Sarah, what are you doing? You need to get cleaned up and rest. We can deal with everything else tomorrow." But Sarah was already typing, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "I'm sending this video to a few people who need to see it. Not for revenge, but for truth." She started with her close friend Gratchel, who ran a support group for professional women dealing with domestic issues. Then she sent it to her mentor, Judge Patricia Williams, who had always warned her about the signs she was choosing to ignore in her marriage. Finally, she sent it to her best friend from law school, now a family court lawyer. "I'm not just sharing a video of my husband throwing cake at me," Sarah explained to her confused sister. "I'm sharing 5 years of hidden truth. Every time he made me feel small for succeeding. Every time he turned his unemployment into my fault. Every time he used our racial difference as a weapon when he felt insecure." Tanya sat down heavily in one of the office chairs. "I never knew it was that bad." "Because I never showed it," Sarah said, still typing. "I was too busy being the perfect wife, the understanding partner, the successful black woman who had it all figured out. But tonight, when he threw that cake at me..." She paused, looking at her sister. "He didn't just ruin my dress. He showed everyone exactly who he is." Her phone buzzed with incoming messages as people began receiving the video. Rachel was first. "Call me immediately. I'm here for you." Then Judge Williams, "My office, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we'll discuss your options." Her law school friend sent a simple message. "I'm preparing the papers. Just say when." Sarah finally stood up, ready to clean herself off. "For years, I helped other women stand up to their abusers in court. I argued their cases, fought for their rights, told them they deserved better. Tonight, I'm finally taking my own advice." She walked to her private bathroom but stopped at the door. "Tanya, can you do me a favor? Check social media in about an hour. I have a feeling this story isn't going to stay private for long." "What do you mean?" Tanya asked. Sarah turned back, and for the first time that evening, her smile reached her eyes. "I mean that sometimes the best way to fight darkness is to shine a light on it. And tonight, that light is going to be very, very bright." By morning, Sarah's video had spread far beyond her small circle of friends. Someone at the restaurant had also recorded the incident, and both videos were now trending on social media. The hashtag #cakewife was everywhere, but the conversation wasn't about the cake. It was about the bigger issues Sarah had wanted to highlight. Sarah sat in Judge Patricia Williams's office, now dressed in a crisp blue suit, her hair neatly arranged. The older judge watched the video for the third time, her expression growing more serious with each viewing. "You know," Judge Williams said, turning off her tablet, "when you first started dating James, you told me he was different, that he supported your career, celebrated your success." Sarah nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "He was different then, or maybe I just didn't want to see the truth." "Your video has over 1 million views now," the judge said, turning her computer screen to show Sarah. The comments section was filled with stories from other women, professionals sharing their own experiences with partners who couldn't handle their success. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Rachel had already invited her to speak at next month's support group meeting. 3 major news networks wanted interviews, but the message that caught her eye was from Le Maison's owner. "He wants to start a foundation," Sarah explained to the judge, reading the message. "Using the restaurant as a safe space for women to share their stories. He says what happened last night opened his eyes to how many people are suffering in silence." Just then, Sarah's office assistant, Jenny, rushed in without knocking. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this." She held up her phone, showing a live news broadcast. James was standing outside their house, surrounded by reporters. "Turn it up," Judge Williams instructed. James looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and his clothes wrinkled. But it was his expression that shocked Sarah. He looked broken, like a man who had finally seen his own reflection clearly. "I want to apologize to my wife, Sarah," James was saying, his voice shaking. "What I did was inexcusable. I let my insecurities about being unemployed, about her success, about our racial differences, poison our marriage. I've been attending counseling since last night, and I'm starting to understand how toxic my behavior has been." Sarah watched silently as James continued, admitting to years of emotional abuse, of using her race against her when he felt threatened, of trying to dim her light because he couldn't handle its brightness. "Don't you dare cry," Judge Williams said sharply, noticing Sarah's eyes getting wet. "He doesn't deserve your tears." "I'm not crying for him," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "I'm crying for all the years I spent thinking I had to make myself smaller to make him feel bigger." Jenny's phone buzzed with more notifications. The video's been shared by several major civil rights organizations. They're calling it a powerful example of maintaining dignity in the face of abuse. You're trending in 12 countries now. Sarah stood up and walked to Judge Williams's window, looking out over the city. She could see the building where she'd first met James, the park where he proposed, the church where they'd gotten married. So many memories, all colored differently now in the harsh light of truth. "What do you want to do next?" Judge Williams asked, joining her at the window. Sarah turned to face her mentor, her expression determined. "I want to help other women find their voice. Not everyone can record their moment of clarity. Not everyone has a restaurant full of witnesses. But everyone deserves to be heard." "And James?" "James needs to help himself first," Sarah said firmly. "I spent 5 years trying to fix him, to fix us. Now it's time for me to focus on helping others." Her phone buzzed again, another message from the restaurant owner. He wanted to host a women's empowerment dinner next week, with Sarah as the keynote speaker. The theme? Rising from the ashes, or in this case, the cake. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly free. 1 month after the cake incident, Sarah stood at the podium in Le Maison's newly renovated private event space. The room was packed with women from all walks of life: lawyers, doctors, teachers, stay-at-home moms, and even a few familiar faces from the night of the incident. The older couple who had witnessed everything sat in the front row, smiling encouragingly. "When my husband threw that cake at me," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. 6 months after the cake incident, Sarah sat in her new apartment overlooking the city park. The morning sun streamed through large windows, highlighting the peaceful space she had created for herself. There were no memories of James here, no echoes of angry words or uncomfortable silences. Just peace. Her phone buzzed with a message from her divorce lawyer. The papers were finally ready for signing. James hadn't contested anything, agreeing to all her terms. According to her lawyer, he had said, she deserves everything and more. Sarah picked up her coffee mug and walked to the window. Below, she could see women entering the community center where she now held weekly support meetings. What had started as a small group in La Maison had grown into a national network of professional women supporting each other through similar situations. Her sister Tanya called just as she was getting ready to leave for work. "Have you seen the morning news?" she asked excitedly. Sarah switched on her TV to find her story being featured on a major morning show. But it wasn't about the cake incident anymore. They were covering the success of her foundation. The Rise Above Foundation had helped over 200 women in the past 6 months, providing legal aid, counseling, and support. And guess what else? Tanya continued. James's therapy group wants to partner with the foundation. They're starting a program for men to address their behaviors before they escalate. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at hearing James's name. He had kept his word about getting help, attending therapy 3 times a week, and starting a support group for men struggling with similar issues. They hadn't spoken directly since that night, but she had heard through mutual friends that he was doing the real work of changing. "That's good," Sarah said simply. "Change has to come from both sides." At work, Sarah's corner office had become a safe space for junior associates to seek advice, not just about legal matters but about life. Young women would often stop by during lunch, asking how she found the strength that night to remain calm and take control of her narrative. "I didn't feel strong in that moment," she always told them honestly. "I felt humiliated and hurt. But I knew I had a choice: let that moment break me, or use it to break the silence." That afternoon, Sarah had a meeting with Judge Williams to discuss expanding their legal clinic program. As she gathered her files, she noticed a small news alert on her computer. A video was trending: another woman, in another restaurant, facing a similar situation. But this time, the woman had pulled out her phone immediately, saying, "I learned this from Sarah Thompson." In Judge Williams's office, the older woman had already seen the new video. "Your cake turned into quite a movement," she said with a proud smile. "Who would have thought?" "It was never about the cake," Sarah replied, pulling out her foundation's latest statistics. "It was about showing women they don't have to swallow their dignity along with their pain." That evening, Sarah returned to La Maison for their monthly legal clinic. The restaurant had become a symbol of transformation, its elegant dining room regularly converting into a space of healing and hope. Marcus still worked there, now promoted to event coordinator for all foundation activities. As Sarah walked through the door, she paused to look at a small framed photo on the wall. It showed her from that night, cake-covered but dignified, phone in hand. Underneath was a simple quote: "Sometimes strength wears frosting." She smiled at the photo, remembering how far she had come. Her marriage had crumbled like that anniversary cake, but from those crumbs, she had built something much stronger, a foundation of hope for others. Later that night, as she prepared for bed in her peaceful new home, Sarah received one final message. It was from a woman in Texas. "Thank you for showing me that my success is not a threat, my dignity is not negotiable, and my voice matters. You turned your cake into our courage." Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not a victim, but a warrior. Sometimes the strongest weapons aren't fists or harsh words, but a steady hand holding a phone, recording truth. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in fighting back, but in rising above. And sometimes, just sometimes, it takes a cake in the face to change the world.